This is the Ross Kaminsky Show. Now, Ross Kaminsky on Denver's talk station, 630 KHOW.
All right, good morning, 7:07 on this overcast. And is it drizzling out there yet, Chris?
It is. It's foggy and drizzly.
Foggy and drizzly. My mom's plane arrives in 3 hours, so I told her she should probably be fine. She got an earlier flight, so she'd get in at 10 instead of getting in at 2:30, and hopefully that'll be the difference, and she'll be able to land. Joining me in studio for our monthly conversation, State Senator and Senate Minority Leader Chris Holbert from Douglas County. What are the main residential areas that you represent, just so people know?
West of the town of Parker, all of Lone Tree, Highlands Ranch, Roxborough Park, down to Sedalia, Castle Pines North, and Surrey Ridge.
Gotcha. My wife wants to move to Sedalia.
We'd love to have you. Just pick the north side.
Yeah, exactly. That'd be closer to my work.
Senate 30 is way better than Senate 4, I hear. No, they're both awesome.
Why? Who's the other one?
Jim Smallwood is the senator for Senate District 4.
So I want to talk briefly. I know this is not your number one issue.
Sure.
You personally, in terms of expertise, because you're not on the relevant committee here. But I want to just talk briefly about the family leave bill, because I've spent a lot of time on it this morning. And I think one of the main things I want to address with you, because it doesn't get into much to the nitty-gritty details of the bill, which are in flux anyway, is that a listener emailed me and said, look, this kind of big tax and spend bill is the reason that Coloradans voted for Tabor. Will we get to vote on this thing when they're going to raise taxes by $1 billion a year? If this passes, are we going to get to vote on it? What do you think?
My answer is you should. We should. The people should vote on this. In my judgment, this is a tax. We've seen this before. It's being called a fee. I've talked with constituents. I've talked with other legislators about this. If it was proposed as a tax and going to the ballot, I would think I would still be opposed to the bill, but that would make sense to me under Tabor. This is calculated as a percentage of income, and if it's a fee, I would think that we would all pay the same amount. But that's not the proposal. It is a percentage of income.
Do you think there will be, if it passes, a lawsuit challenging it as a Tabor violation?
I think so. I don't know who would do that.
Maybe cut Colorado Union of Taxpayers, perhaps, or independents.
Yeah, but there's certainly the opportunity to do that. Relative to the red flag bill and then gun control legislation back in 2013, the lesson that I learned, I'm not an attorney, I can't give legal advice, but I encourage people to remember the question of standing. I think no one has standing on a bill, because a bill isn't a law. A bill has to become law, and then the condition of standing can exist. So if there is court challenge, it would be after it becomes law.
Right, and in fact, it might be way after it becomes law. It's entirely possible that a court will say you don't have standing until the tax is actually assessed on you.
Could be, yes.
And we're going to talk to Paul Lundeen about this in a little less than half an hour. He was in the Finance Committee meeting yesterday, but I believe that the Democrats are now saying they want to put off the beginning of this, the tax collection, until 2023 and put off benefits until 2024. If that's correct, then I don't even know why they'd go ahead with this. But anyway, can you just talk a little more broadly, why is it that Democrats seem to be able to get away with calling every new tax a fee so that we don't get to vote on it, despite the fact that we have Tabor?
There was something similar back in 2009-10. I believe it was during the 2010 session, but the faster fee. They increased the cost to renew your license plates, and if you didn't renew and let it go a year or two, you would pay penalty to get a vehicle reinstated. That was labeled a fee. What were the political conditions in 2010? The Democrats controlled the House, Senate, and the governor's office, and that's what they did. So now we see this again, a amount of money being collected, proposed to be collected by government, that sure seems to meet my definition of a tax. but they're calling it a fee, and I don't want to get into try to argue their side.
Right.
But I think they're trying to point to this is being collected for a specific purpose, which is generally what a fee is. But if it is a fee, again, wouldn't it be the same amount for everyone, not a percentage of your income, which would vary based on everyone?
Right. And I would also point out the state Supreme Court upheld some of that stuff that was done where they called taxes fees. Yes. This state Supreme Court is not going to help us out here. The other thing that I would mention regarding a fee, when I pay a fee, an actual fee,
yes,
to go into Roxborough State Park in your district.
Yes, sir.
I pay that fee because I am using something.
Yes.
Or if I pay a toll, which is like a fee, it's because I'm using that road. Most people who pay this tax will never use the quote-unquote benefit from this thing. So in that sense, it's also not a fee.
I agree. I love to carry my Matthews bow around during August and September each year. People generally refer to that as deer archery season.
Mm-hmm.
I call it carry my bow around season. And I pay a fee to get a license to go participate in that activity. And if you don't want to do that, you don't have to pay that fee.
Right.
That's not how the family leave would work. You would be paying for something even if you don't want it. Even, I think, at least as the bill was originally introduced, you would even pay that even if your employer offers leave.
So and just so you know, they appear to be changing that now, but the employer has to offer leave that the government says is good enough,
right?
As good as their outrageously generous thing. And I would say, and just last thing on this, because we got other things we need to talk about.
Sure.
But to me, this is almost closer to like the RTD sales tax that we pay,
okay,
in that you go and buy something, you're paying money through this RTD tax into a system that probably most people will never use, or at least many people will never use. They don't call that a fee because it's obviously not one. It's obviously a tax. And anyway, we'll see.
I think you're on to something there. That we pay. We go into a store and we buy something. We pay sales tax, and if you buy that within the RTD geographic area, you're also paying the RTD tax, even if you don't ride RTD. So yeah, family leave would operate in a similar way. You would pay this tax so-called fee, even if you didn't want the benefit or use it.
Yeah. And even if you know you're never going to use it, and even if you'd be willing to sign a piece of paper saying, I'm never going to use it, and even though so many employees would probably say, you know what, I'd rather have a bigger paycheck than have this benefit. Anyway, I digress. I'll do more of that later. I want to talk a little bit about transportation.
Sure.
There was an amount that came out of the Senate process, the House process. What are these numbers looking like as far as money to help fix and maintain our roads? Do you think they're a reasonable number for this year? And I think some people kind of misunderstand state budgeting and think it's a lot like federal budgeting where you just run up debt. What is the funding mechanism for whatever these amounts are?
Your state and federal gas taxes, when you fill up your tank at the gas station, the state and federal gas taxes don't go into the state budget. They go into a place called HUTF, Highway Users Tax Fund. And then CDOT, your county commissioners, city councils, town councils, groups like the Denver Regional Council of Governments decide what projects get done. The state legislature doesn't do that. For years, we have had almost zero of what's called the general fund. That's state tax dollars that are paid in to the general fund and allocated by the legislature. The legislature's allocated very little of that to roads and bridges. In the past 3 years, Senate Republicans have been calling for at least $300 million to go from the general fund, your state tax dollars, into roads and bridges. This year, the budget includes $200 million that is a result of prior legislation. The Joint Budget Committee added $30 million for a total of $230. And then in the Senate budget process, we added another $106 to bring it up to $336 million, which is the amount that I called for on opening day of the session. $336 million of general fund tax dollars to go in and supplement all of the other gas tax money that's in HUTF to fix roads and bridges or build new roads and bridges in Colorado. When the budget went through the House, the standard process is that the House strips out all amendments the Senate put in so that the representatives in the House start with the same budget that the senators did, which is standard procedure. And then they added in an amendment, not at 106, but an additional 70 for a total of 300. So the Senate total was 336. The House total is 300. Now the conference committee, which are the 6 members of the Joint Budget Committee, are working this week to figure out what the final budget will look like, and will it have 300 million extra or 336 or somewhere in between. The last part of your question is really important for people to differentiate between Colorado state budget and the federal budget. Our Constitution in Colorado requires that we allocate no more than revenue, which means the budget has to be balanced. We cannot allocate more than 100 cents out of each dollar that we will actually have during that fiscal year. So this isn't deficit spending. There's not a tax increase. This is money that the people of Colorado have either paid or will pay over the next fiscal year, which starts July 1st and ends June 30th.
Based on the estimates of tax revenue into the state.
Yes, right now we're estimating for next year, and we're working with real numbers for this fiscal year, which we're in the tail end of that. That ends June 30th, so we have to balance the current fiscal year budget before we leave and make sure that that's going to be balanced on June 30th, and then we project out a budget that starts July 1st on revenue that should come in during the next year. When we come back into session next January, one of the first things we'll do is consider a series of what are called supplemental bills to make sure that that fiscal year ends in a balanced budget as well.
What happens if there's an economic slowdown and you begin to anticipate the tax revenue will be less than you had planned when you did the budget?
We have to reduce it. We cannot spend more than we have, and the Constitution that the people of Colorado have given us requires that, so it's not optional. We would have to cut.
One of the things that plays into this a little bit is this full-day kindergarten,
Yes.
which Governor Polis likes to call free, but of course it costs us, schooling costs the state, I don't know how many billions of dollars we spend on education, so it's not free, it's just you don't pay the school at the moment you go, you pay through property taxes and some other things. So Jared wanted $200 and something million for this project.
227.
And the legislature gave him, what, 185?
185, yes.
Okay. Now, part of the reason the legislature said that they did 185 was they thought that it would take maybe a year, 2 years for, this acceptance, this utilization of full-day kindergarten. A lot of places in the state have half-day kindergarten right now, and if you want to go to full-day, and this is at least how it was in Boulder County where my kids were for kindergarten, you could pay the school the difference to go to full day. So Jared wants full day covered by taxpayers. I saw a story yesterday about how some very large school districts are ramping up really fast to be ready for full day, like ASAP, which means that starting from before day one, it already looks like the 185 might not be enough. So how does that play out? And how might that impact, let's say, transportation funding? Because I've talked about this on the show, is that's a potential trade-off. We might get less fix of our roads because Jared wants full-day kindergarten.
Well, right now the Joint Budget Committee is really they've put up a firewall between K through 12 funding, public education funding, and transportation funding. So they're looking for sources. We have to take away. We have to provide less increase somewhere else in order to get that extra 70 million out of the House or 106 out of the Senate. The downturn in the economy could decrease both sides of that equation for K through 12 and transportation. I think it's really important for people in Colorado to keep in perspective that their school district, there's 178 of those in Colorado, and you live in one. If you live in Colorado, you live in one, and you have a locally elected school board of either 5 or 7 people. They control the budget for that school district, not the legislature. So you have a participating entity in the legislature that sends money back from the state to that school district, but your school board decides how they budget, and they decide whether they want to do full-day K or half-day K, and the proposal right now is that if they decide to do full day K, then they get a piece of that $185 million. That's a really important number because there's 178 school districts. If they all decided to do it, what's 178 school districts? What is their share of 185 million? It's just over $1 million.
Why
each.
would it be even by school district, regardless of the number of kids in the district?
No, it would not.
Yeah, okay.
That's just simple math.
Yeah.
The three biggest districts are Denver, Jeffco, and Douglas. So they have more kids; they would get a larger share. But just simple math equation: 185 by 178. That's not a lot of money.
Right. No, it's really not. All right, we've got about 90 seconds left.
Sure.
What is the mood down there? I mean, when I see these Democrats, I see them all except for Leroy Garcia, who was willing to vote no on red flag, but only because he knew it was going to pass anyway. I mean, it seems to me like there isn't a single Democrat who will vote no on a big Democratic bill if they know that their no vote would kill it. I mean, they're just on a freaking rampage. I mean, you're there every day. I got about a minute. What do you feel like the mood is?
It ends in 23 days. Midnight, Friday, May 3rd is the end. It cannot be extended in Colorado. The governor can't do it. The legislature can't do it. We can't do it together. We cannot go beyond midnight, Friday, May 3rd. So this will end. That gives us some hope. It also puts a lot of pressure on us. We have more bills this year that have not moved through the first committee than at this point last year. And we have more bills that haven't been heard in the first committee, and yet we have fewer total bills that have been introduced. So we are way behind. There's a building amount of stress that this work has to get done, or at some point it'll have to be prioritized and certain things won't get done. But it all ends by Friday, May 3rd at midnight.
Well, that doesn't say much for Democratic leadership in the state legislature. I've got to leave it there. State Senator Chris Holbert, Colorado State Senate Minority Leader, representing much of Douglas County. Thanks for being here. You're welcome. Always. We'll keep in touch, and hopefully we'll talk a month from now in a post-session wrap-up.
It'll be done.
It'll be done. We'll be right back with State Senator Paul Lundeen, who was in the hearing yesterday about the family leave bill.
This report is sponsored by Staples.
Foggy conditions this morning out in the foothills. Some rain showers starting to move in the metro area.